The cameras had just stopped rolling when Walt Disney showed his true face. On that cold December morning in 1966, when ambulance sirens filled the Burbank studios, nobody knew the truth. Walt Disney was dead, but the secret buried with him would surface 40 years later. Helen Palmer, Walt's closest assistant, was first to arrive at the studio that morning. Walt's office door was locked as always, but the faint music coming from inside worried Helen. When she opened the door, what she saw would haunt her for the rest of her life. Walt was sitting at his desk, his hand still clutching the key to his locked drawer. It was as if in his final moment, he was still trying to open that drawer. Years later, Helen would describe that moment differently. Walt's face didn't look peaceful. It looked like someone exhausted from hiding something, yet terrified of it coming to light. Make sure to subscribe and watch this entire shocking revelation about the man who shaped our childhoods. The funeral was a grand ceremony. All of America mourned the hero of children, the father of Mickey Mouse, the architect of fantasy, the creator of happiness was gone. But studio executives were preoccupied with something else entirely, that locked drawer in Walt's office. Nobody could have predicted what would emerge from it. Lawyers, board members, and Walt's brother Roy Disney gathered secretly in the office at midnight. When the drawer was opened, there were 3 separate envelopes inside. The first envelope read, 1943, the beginning. The second said 1955, the Disneyland truth, and the third had just one word written in red ink, unforgivable. Roy Disney's hands were trembling as he opened the first envelope. The documents inside proved the existence of a secret organization Walt Disney had founded in Los Angeles in 1943. While this organization appeared to produce children's entertainment, it actually served a completely different purpose. The documents stated to shape the minds of American children, to teach them what is right and wrong. This is not just entertainment, this is a responsibility, and I will share this responsibility with no one. But the real shock was hidden in the second envelope. When Disneyland opened in 1955, Walt Disney promised happiness to the world. However, what happened during the park's construction was far from innocent. The documents showed that 3 separate accidents during construction had been deliberately covered up. There were whispers among the workers. Disney, who had forcibly evicted poor families living on the land where the park would be built, had used ruthless methods against one family that resisted. The story of 8-year-old Tommy Martinez from that family haunted Walt until the end of his life. Tommy and his family lived in a small house on the land where Disneyland would be built. Walt had offered them money, but the family didn't want to leave. One night, a fire broke out around the house, and the family was forced to abandon their home. Official records listed this as an accident, but the document in Walt's drawer said something else. Walt had written in his own handwriting, "Sometimes great dreams require small sacrifices. I can't forget the look in that boy's eyes. But to make millions of children happy, one child's..." The sentence was left unfinished. It was as if Walt couldn't even face his own conscience. Helen Palmer's eyes would fill with tears when remembering Walt's final days. Walt constantly had nightmares. Once he had fallen asleep in his office and woke up screaming. He was delirious, shouting, "Tommy! Tommy!" When I asked who that was, he just said, "Nobody, someone who should be forgotten." By the early 1960s, Walt Disney had complete control over the animation industry. But this control wasn't just about creativity. There were whispers among the artists working at the studio. It was said that Walt had a system he called special files, tracking the private lives of every employee. Animator Jack Kinney would say years later in an interview, "Walt knew all of us, not just what we did at work, but who we met with, what political views we held, even where we went on weekends. Once he told me, 'Jack, that bar you went to last night, it's not suitable for you.' When I asked how he knew, he just smiled." But Walt's obsession wasn't limited to just his employees. Children and their families were also targets. He had a secret team that studied the behavior of every child who visited Disneyland. This team recorded which characters children loved, which stories they responded to, even which colors made them happier. Walt used this information to plant messages in children's subconscious. For example, in Sleeping Beauty, released in 1959, the color combination and music in the scene where the princess awakens were specifically designed to strengthen feelings of obedience to authority in children. Walt's notes read, "To shape a generation, you must control their dreams." Roy Disney's hands trembled as he read his brother's notes. He thought he knew Walt, but before him was a completely different person. He couldn't bring himself to open the third envelope. The word unforgivable written on it frightened Roy. That envelope remained unopened for weeks. Finally, it was decided it had to be opened to determine the company's future. Inside was a single photograph and a brief note. The photograph showed Walt Disney shaking hands with an unidentified man. The man's face had been deliberately scratched out. The note read, 1943 to 1966. Our agreement has ended. I'm taking your secret to the grave. But if the truth ever comes out, forgive me. The identity of that man was never definitively discovered, but some researchers claimed he was one of the powerful political figures of the era. Rumors that Walt Disney didn't just make children's films but also conducted special projects for the government grew stronger. In 1961, Walt Disney launched what he called the Florida Project, which would later become Disney World. But the real purpose of this project was different from what was announced to the public. According to the documents, Walt was building not just a theme park but an experimental prototype community where he could implement his social engineering theories. APCOT, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow, was Walt's ultimate dream. But this dream involved controlling every aspect of residents' lives, from what they ate to what they watched, from their children's education to their social relationships. Everything would be determined by Walt's vision. He called it the perfect American society, but critics would later call it a dystopian nightmare. One former employee who worked on the Epoch project revealed years later Walt wanted to create a city where there was no crime, no poverty, no unhappiness. But to achieve this, he was willing to sacrifice individual freedom. Residents would be constantly monitored, their behaviors analyzed, their thoughts shaped through subtle psychological techniques. The most disturbing discovery in Walt's secret files was related to his animation techniques. Since the 1940s, Walt had been experimenting with subliminal messages in his cartoons. These messages were designed to influence children's behavior without their conscious awareness. A frame lasting only 1/24 of a second could contain images or words that would embed themselves in a child's subconscious. In Cinderella, released in 1950, there were hidden frames showing images of obedient children being rewarded while disobedient ones faced consequences. These images were so brief that conscious eyes couldn't see them, but the brain registered them. Walt believed he was creating better citizens, but critics called it mind control. Dr. Sarah Whitman, a child psychologist who analyzed Disney films in the 1970s, made a shocking discovery. Children who watched Disney movies regularly showed specific behavioral patterns. They were more likely to accept authority, less likely to question rules, and showed decreased creativity in problem-solving tasks. When she tried to publish her findings, she faced mysterious legal threats, and her research funding was suddenly cut. Walt's relationship with his own family was equally troubling. His daughters, Diane and Sharon, lived under constant surveillance. Walt had installed hidden microphones in their bedrooms, recorded their phone conversations, and had them followed by private investigators. He justified this by saying he was protecting them, but the psychological damage was severe. Sharon Disney would later struggle with trust issues and paranoia her entire life. In a rare interview before her death, she hinted at the darkness in her childhood. Father loved us, but his love was controlling. He needed to know everything. Control everything. We weren't daughters, we were projects to be perfected. The third envelope, marked unforgivable, contained the darkest secret of all. It revealed Walt's involvement in a government program during World War II that went far beyond making propaganda films. Documents suggested Walt had participated in psychological warfare experiments on prisoners of war, using animation and sound to break down their mental resistance. One document, dated 1944, described an experiment where Japanese POWs were forced to watch specially designed cartoon sequences for hours. These cartoons contained rapidly flashing images and specific sound frequencies designed to cause psychological distress. Walt's signature was at the bottom of the report, along with his note, "The power of animation extends far beyond entertainment. It can rebuild minds or destroy them." But perhaps the most chilling revelation was Walt's final project. In his last months, he had been working on something he called the ultimate experience. This wasn't just another theme park attraction. According to his notes, it was a technology that would allow him to directly influence human emotions through a combination of visual, auditory, and even olfactory stimuli. Walt had been collaborating with neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists to develop a system that could induce specific emotional states in subjects. Joy, fear, nostalgia, even love could be triggered at will. He envisioned a future where Disney could literally control how people felt, creating the perfect emotional experience. The prototype for this technology was allegedly tested in a secret room beneath Disneyland, known only to a handful of employees as the Vault. Test subjects would enter the room and emerge hours later with no memory of what happened inside. But they all reported feeling an overwhelming sense of happiness and loyalty to Disney that lasted for weeks. Dr. Robert Harrison, a neuroscientist who claimed to have worked on the project, came forward in 2003 with disturbing allegations. He said Walt had discovered specific neural pathways that, when stimulated correctly, could override rational thought and create permanent emotional associations. The technology was so powerful and potentially dangerous that after Walt's death, Roy Disney ordered all research destroyed. But according to Dr. Harrison, not everything was destroyed. Some of the research was allegedly incorporated into later Disney attractions, diluted but still effective. He claimed that certain rides and shows at Disney parks still use modified versions of Walt's emotional manipulation techniques, though at much safer levels. The influence of Walt's secret projects extended beyond his death. In the 1970s and 1980s, former Disney employees began coming forward with stories of strange experiences and unexplained phenomena at the parks. Security guards reported seeing Walt's ghost in his old apartment above the fire station on Main Street. But more disturbing were the reports of children having identical recurring dreams after visiting Disneyland. These dreams always followed the same pattern. Children would dream of Mickey Mouse visiting them at night, telling them to be good, obey their parents, and always trust Disney. The dreams were so vivid and consistent across different children that parents began forming support groups. Disney Corporation dismissed these reports as coincidence, but internal memos leaked in the 1990s showed the company was actively monitoring and suppressing these stories. Walt's personal journals, discovered hidden in a secret compartment in his desk, revealed his ultimate vision. He wrote, "I am not creating entertainment. I am creating the future of human consciousness. Through joy and wonder, I will shape not just what children think, but how they think. Disney will become not just a brand, but a way of life, a religion of happiness that no one can escape because no one will want to." The final entry in his journal, written just days before his death, showed a man wrestling with his legacy. "I have built an empire on innocence while harboring such darkness. My creations bring joy to millions. But at what cost? Tommy Martinez haunts my dreams. The families I destroyed, the minds I've manipulated, the truths I've hidden, is it worth it? History will judge me, but I fear that judgment. Perhaps it's better if some secrets die with me." But the secrets didn't die with Walt. In 2006, during renovations at Disneyland, workers discovered a hidden room behind the Matterhorn attraction. Inside were thousands of files, photographs, and tape recordings. The Disney Corporation immediately sealed the area and brought in a specialized team to remove the contents. Workers who saw inside were required to sign strict non-disclosure agreements. But one anonymous source described seeing psychological profiles of hundreds of children, dating back to the 1950s, with detailed plans for influencing their development. Former Disney animator Frank Thomas, one of Walt's 9 old men, gave a deathbed confession in 2004 that added another layer to the mystery. He claimed that Walt had hidden multiple versions of classic Disney films, each containing different levels of subliminal content. These dark versions were allegedly stored in a climate-controlled vault somewhere in the California desert, waiting for a time when society would be ready for Walt's complete vision. Thomas also revealed that Walt had been obsessed with immortality in his final years, not just through cryonics as popularly believed, but through psychological immortality. He wanted to embed his consciousness, his values and his vision so deeply into popular culture that he would effectively live forever in the minds of every generation. The influence extended to Walt's business practices. Former employees revealed a culture of absolute loyalty enforced through both rewards and threats. Those who pleased Walt received lavish bonuses and opportunities. But those who crossed him found their careers destroyed, not just at Disney but throughout Hollywood. Walt maintained files on every employee's weaknesses, secrets, and vulnerabilities, using them as leverage when necessary. Mary Jacobson, a former secretary, recalled Walt would smile at you, call you by name, make you feel special. But if you ever went against him, even in the smallest way, you'd find yourself not just fired but blacklisted. He had connections everywhere. Police, politicians, other studio heads. One word from Walt, and you'd never work in entertainment again. The darkest allegation came from a former Imagineer who worked on the original Disneyland attractions. He claimed that Walt had designed certain areas of the park as psychological experiments, studying how crowds behaved under different stimuli. The layout of Main Street, USA, for example, was supposedly designed using principles from rat maze experiments, subtly directing guests toward specific shops and attractions while making them believe they were choosing freely. Even the famous Disney smell, that distinctive scent pumped through the parks, was allegedly developed using research from Walt's psychological experiments. The smell was designed to trigger nostalgia and childlike vulnerability, making guests more susceptible to suggestion and more likely to spend money. In his final months, Walt became increasingly paranoid. He believed that his secrets would be discovered, that his carefully constructed image would crumble. He spent hours in his office, burning documents, destroying evidence, but he couldn't bring himself to destroy everything. Perhaps part of him wanted the truth to eventually come out. Helen Palmer, his loyal assistant, noticed the change. In those last weeks, Walt seemed haunted. He would stare at the portraits of Mickey Mouse on his wall and mutter, "What have I done? What have I created?" He wasn't proud anymore. He was afraid. The night before his death, Walt made one final phone call. The recipient has never been identified. But Helen, who overheard part of the conversation, remembered Walt saying, "The deal is off. I'm done. Let them remember me as Uncle Walt, not as what I really am." The true extent of Walt Disney's dark legacy may never be fully known. The Disney Corporation has spent decades and millions of dollars suppressing information, settling lawsuits quietly, and maintaining the pristine image of their founder. But the cracks in the facade continue to show. Former Disney CEO Michael Eisner once privately admitted, "Walt Disney was a genius, but genius and darkness often go hand in hand. We celebrate the magic he created, while carefully managing the shadows he left behind." Today, millions of families visit Disney parks, watch Disney movies, and buy Disney products, unaware of the complex and troubling history behind the magic. The empire Walt Disney built continues to grow, spreading across the globe, influencing new generations of children. Whether his vision was ultimately beneficial or harmful remains a matter of debate. But one thing is certain: the man who gave the world Mickey Mouse, who created the happiest place on earth, who taught us to wish upon a star, was far more complicated than the uncle figure he presented to the world. Behind the warm smile and twinkling eyes was a man who understood the power of innocence and wasn't afraid to exploit it. As Roy Disney reportedly said after reading his brother's secret files, Walt always said he was in the business of making dreams come true. He just never mentioned that some of those dreams were nightmares. The final irony of Walt Disney's life is that his greatest creation wasn't Mickey Mouse or Disneyland. It was his own image, a carefully constructed persona that survived his death and continues to enchant the world. The real Walt Disney, with all his complexities, contradictions, and dark secrets, remains hidden behind the smiling face of the empire he built. In the end, Perhaps that's Walt's ultimate triumph. He succeeded in controlling not just what we see, but how we see it. Even knowing these dark truths, millions still find joy in Disney's creations. The magic, tainted though it may be, endures. And somewhere perhaps Walt Disney's ghost is still watching, still controlling, still shaping the dreams of children who will never know the full truth about the man behind the mouse.